Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar of the academic year. Great to have you with us. On behalf of Contact North, I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's webinar, From Policy to Practice, How to Make AI Work for Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. I'm Sarah Govro, Director of Teach Online and the Online Learning News at Contact North, and I'll be your host. I'd like to begin with a provincial land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that Contact North's work and the work of our community partners takes place on traditional Indigenous territories across the province. We are grateful to be able to live and work on these lands. We express our gratitude to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples who have cared for these territories since time immemorial and who continue to strengthen communities across Ontario. Just a few quick notes before we start. We're using Zoom webinar today, so participants' microphones and cameras will remain off. The chat is open, but please remember to select everyone in the drop-down menu when posting. We'll have time for questions at the end of the session today. The Q&A tool is located at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions that resonate with you, you can click the upvote button, which is the thumbs up icon. We also have live captioning. Simply click the closed caption icon at the bottom of the screen, and the webinar will be recorded, and I will be posting that recording and the presentation slides on teachonline.ca after the session, and you will also receive a link via email in about 24 hours. All right, that's it from me. Now for our main event. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sidney Shapiro, Assistant Professor of Business Analytics at the University of Lethbridge's Dillon School of Business and Adjunct Assistant Professor of Computer Science. Dr. Shapiro, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to fade to the background. I'm going to let you do your thing.
All right. Hi, everybody. Good morning and welcome. We're going to talk about AI and policy. I hope that based on the number of people who are here, there's a lot of interest in this particular topic. And, you know, I think people are grappling with how do we deal with AI technology? Things are changing so fast. We seem to all have been caught up in this massive AI change and looking at ways that we could now adjust and start working with it. So we'll go through some slides. We're going to talk about how AI looks today and maybe what's happening in the future, especially how it relates to higher education policy. If you have any questions, just drop them in the chat and we'll go from there. All right. So can you see the screen? I think that's where we should have started.
You're good.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay. So I'm Sidney Shapiro. I'm an assistant professor of business analytics. Yesterday, I taught a class of 30 students, and I said, today we're going to have quite a larger audience. And they said, no, talk's great. You're good to go. All right. So what we're talking about today is based on two chapters that I wrote. One is about AI policy in higher education, frameworks for responsible deployment. And the other is bridging the AI divide, looking at equity, integrity, and governance of generative AI in higher education. And these ideas come from both. You know, so let's start off by talking about AI is not new. There's been AI around for a very long time. And what's changed recently is this, supercharge of generative AI, which is fundamentally a software advancement as opposed to a hardware advancement. So it's not like a new kind of computer was invented and that changed everything. What really changed, or what was really fundamental, a huge shift, is this massive advancement in software. You may have heard of this big controversy a while ago with DeepSeek. And that really boils down to a better kind of technology, a better kind of software that made it work. We currently don't have AI in our devices. We currently don't have AI, for the most part. We don't have AI in our fridges or microwaves, but eventually that's going to happen. Right now, many companies are developing AI chips that will eventually run small models on small devices. So I could say to my microwave, I just put in a potato and it will say, fantastic, that's X number of minutes. That technology is possible now using a data center, but it's not yet possible with the devices that we currently have. But eventually it seems like the direction that we're going in. Most AI now runs in a large data center using gigantic models. Now, AI in education is more recent, And despite this chill in the 1970s, where AI was not really being developed at the same pace, they felt like they got to the end. New technology started in the 80s, and that really led to where we are today through a number of different periods where they started developing new technology. But we're here to talk about AI education policy, and everybody is panicking. And this is basically the place that we're starting, that there's a lot of uncertainty. I'm on the AI committee for my university. I've talked about AI policy. I did a lot of research about it, and everybody's upset about it, and everybody has a different consideration. I gave a talk a couple of years ago at an education conference, and 70 people showed up, and I've never seen 70 professors in the same room ever. And I said, what are these people doing here? What is the problem? Why are they here? And it comes down to everybody is worried about their jobs. Everybody's worried about the future of education and what it looks like. And since 2022, when we had this massive shift, the conversation has changed, and the conversation is different based on what people are saying about AI and how it looks in their everyday life. I think some of the panic that the sky is falling initially has now shifted into other conversations. But, it's definitely a big transformative shift. People use AI in many different ways. And from a policy perspective, we're at this moment where we're looking at how to use AI responsibly and how policy factors in. And for many organizations, it's difficult to decide what policy direction should we go to in order to, at the same time, constrain, but also, embrace this new technology because people are going to be using it. So before we get started, I thought that we're going to talk about a few non-sensationalized headlines about AI in education and what people are saying about it now, with no commentary, so you could decide what exactly is happening in the world of AI. Let's go through it. We'll see what the story is. So as of yesterday, Grok laid off 500 trainers, and we see a lot of labor market research coming out saying that young people are being, replaced by AI easily, where senior people to fix the mistakes that AI is doing are becoming more and more in demand. So we see this big shift. It's no longer learn how to prompt engineer or use AI and you're going to get a great job. It's actually, if you don't know the underlying technology or you don't know what it's supposed to look like at the end, AI can't necessarily help you. And we see this a lot with vibe coding. When people randomly use AI to generate products, often they don't know what the end product is supposed to look like. Imagine going to an engineer for your house and they don't know about power systems. They're going to build a whole house, but they leave out the plumbing or the power. That's a really critical component. And an engineer could look at the diagram and say, something's missing. For people who are just getting into vibe coding and don't really know what the end product is supposed to look like, that don't have that domain expertise, it can be really challenging. So these jobs that were promised by AI are being supplanted by what AI can do at scale. Google and MIT offer a no-cost AI course for educators. Salesforce slashed 1,000 jobs amid an aggressive AI hiring spree to get AI engineers, but also Salesforce is going to hire 2,000 people to sell their AI products to other people. Now, you have to wonder, why is Salesforce AI not selling its own product to those same people? So clearly there's some disconnect here. Like, how does this AI Salesforce business work? AI generated food images look tastier than real ones? Can AI take teaching out of the Victorian ages? And there's links to all these articles at the speaker's notes in the slides. So at the end, when you download the slides, take a look there. You could link to all these articles. Can AI transform the classroom just like the calculator? Sophia, an AI robot, gave a commencement speech. How to stop generative AI from destroying the internet? ChatGPT may lead to the downfall of education and critical thinking. AI cheating is hopelessly, irreparably corrupting US higher education. No, AI won't destroy education, but we should still be skeptical. The first year of AI college ends in ruin. These Saskatchewan University students say AI is reshaping their education and job outlook. Will AI replace human TAs? Boston University suggests that they're going to replace striking graduate students with AI. Boston University denies that it would ever say that, and it denies that it would use AI to replace striking teaching assistants. UBC says from science fiction to classroom reality, how UBC instructors are using AI as a teaching tool. The new perfect teaching assistant, universities find new uses for AI. And in Simon Fraser, there's a professor that's using an AI sidekick in this new course. People are learning from these AI patterns and building all kinds of new things. There's all this data that we're using, and the data underpins how we use AI and what we do with it. Both of these pictures are our invented creative, imagination, but they come from some real source and putting different kinds of data together. And AI does have a lot of positive things that we can do in education, like personalized learning. We can create automation. We can look at interactive learning experiences, and we can support research analysis. All these things are possible, and AI can help us do a lot of the tasks that we do. It just depends how we're using it. Now, AI can generally write essays, solve problems, generate code, create images, and you could use many AI engines to do this, like ChatGPT and so on. We could use it for many different things. Like you could invent a case study in class, you could use it for paperwork, you could use it for research, you could, create scenarios. And there's many different ways to use it. I'll tell you personally, I would spend a lot of time coding in class, like typing into the computer, and for 3 hours, students would watch me type. But then it's not a typing class. Like, why are students watching me type if that's not the point of the class? So instead, I could say to the students, give me an idea. They would tell me their idea, like a clinic for superheroes. I would tell that to ChatGPT. It would give me an example, for example, a database or code or something else. And then we could go through and spend our time talking about that example, but have time to do 2 or 3 others. So we have the ability to scale. Now, while this is going on, I still feel guilty that I'm not typing, right? I feel guilty that I'm not actually doing the work. And maybe my role has shifted from being the typer to being somebody who's explaining. I'm not 100% sure about that. And emotionally, I still feel that there's a problem. One of the challenges with AI is that it's still unaware of the context of what you're asking for. So even though you can get a small question that's generalized, you can't really get the real answer and understand all the background behind it. And even AI models that are larger and larger lack context. The context is how all those pieces fit together. And we could use AI in many, many different ways. Like we could do things like automated grading, personal support assistant, taking lecture notes. Are these good ideas? Like, should we be investing in these technologies or investing in people doing these kind of jobs? So it really depends. And I made one small example to show you that we can talk about this idea. So I looked at, we can do personalized tutoring. It could be very efficient for faculty to look at, auto grading, building quizzes, enhancing creativity, writing aids, etc. And I asked ChatGPT, tell me about the environmental impacts of pizza. I didn't really think about it. That was the first example that came to mind. And it turns out there's a lot to know about the environmental footprint of pizza. I had no idea. It tells me about agricultural impacts, livestock impacts, and so on. And I said, wow, this is an interesting topic that I never even considered. I often use pizza as an example in class, not really thinking that there's something deeper behind it. So I told ChatGPT, teach me about it. And then it started building a lesson. It started building a lesson focusing on these different elements. It broke it down for me into the component pieces, ingredients, production and cooking, packaging and transport, consumption and waste. And then it said, okay, which question, and it starts asking me questions. What do you think? Cheese might have a bigger ecological footprint than something like tomato sauce. Interesting. So like, I'm not sure, and you can see I wrote, teach me about this. I didn't actually write a pathway or tell it what to do or tell it what I'm focusing on or what my class is about. It just started choosing and picking a direction. So, these are all great things, and they're all ways that we can leverage AI to work. Now, I don't know if it's worth it. In other words, if the cost of accessing it makes sense, I'm not sure how much it costs to use AI. It could be very expensive in terms of money, in terms of ecology. I don't know. So that's one point. But there's also a lot of ways that it can go wrong. Like, for example, everybody worries about academic integrity. It used to be academic integrity took different forms. And now, once AI is a thing, everybody is worried about how AI is going to turn people's brains off, how they're just going to simply start copy pasting. That leads us to a really important discussion around learning depth. So if you're in class and you're critically engaging and you're thinking about what you're doing, then you're building these pathways in your brain that actually help you doing what you're doing. Like I tell the students, when you go for a job, the first interview you're going to do is a behavioral interview, and that's going to be followed up by a technical interview where somebody's going to ask you a question. And if you say, 1 second, let me check ChatGPT because I don't know what to do or I don't know the pathway of how to get there, that could be a really problem. The challenge is that you have to know what you're supposed to be doing in order to fully leverage the system. If you don't know what to ask for, it'll probably give you an answer that leaves out important elements. That's really the challenge. And there's been studies that have shown that people literally turn their brains off as they're copy pasting. I was having lunch in the cafeteria when I was in Europe at a university, and there's students at the next table copy pasting, copy pasting, copy pasting for 45 minutes. And I thought to myself, the obvious question is, why don't they simply ask ChatGPT what's not working, explain it to me, or teach me, or tell me why this approach doesn't work? But instead, they're just going in circles, trapped in this loop of answers that are good but not good enough and don't actually solve their problem. So the problem is that there's not critical thinking, that critical thinking is completely turned off, and that means that they can't move forward. Now, there's issues around accuracy and bias. Is the information that comes out of it appropriate? And I've had this conversation with nursing students, I've had this conversation with business students, and people ask me things like, why do we have to prescribe medicine? We'll just get AI to do it. Or why do we have to have accountants? We'll just get AI to do it. And the challenge, of course, is if it makes a mistake, who's responsible? What training data underlines the model of how it's coming up with this information? We don't know. It's completely random of why it's choosing the pieces that it's choosing. Maybe there's, training or pathways or augmentation or other things that we can do to help make it more accurate, but it can be confused. It can give the wrong answers. And that is a big problem if you're trying to have a definitive right answer that works in this specific context. Quite often, you're going to a doctor, you're getting a prescription for a particular reason that applies to you, not because it works for most people generally. And that's really the difference between AI that we're using in a general sense that's pretty good for everything, as opposed to a very specific use case that applies to an individual person. Now, I often work with business students to talk about you're building a product and you're vibe coding something amazing and you get investment and people love your idea. Then what happens? It turns out that the brain of your entire product is either ChatGPT or an API, or is the intellectual property of somebody else because that was just like, recycled inside the model. AI doesn't invent anything, it's just recycling what it already has. And if it already has somebody else's intellectual property, do you even own it? This is an open question right now. We're not sure, but it seems like a bad idea to develop your whole company around somebody else's technology or around something else that's a service that we may not know how much it costs. And that's really the challenge. There's also the issue of privacy and IP. What you put into AI is going to come out if they retrain it using that pattern, using that data. And I don't know, you write something confidential. This has happened many times before. And then your competitors get that information out of it. Students, put in an essay and then everybody's essay comes up the same. Not very good. And lastly, there's a big issue with equity. How much are you paying for this model? Are we rewarding the people that are spending $2,000 a month on their AI or $200 a month on their AI compared to the people spending 20 or nothing? Or where do we get AI from? So all these are challenges as we're looking at how do we deploy AI in education? How do people use it? How do we think about how we deploy it in a way that people can use? So from a faculty perspective, I think it's fascinating that in the same building, at the same university, you have so many different opinions of people who are arguing one side or the other, right? So you have huge polarization. Some people say AI is the future. Others say this is destroying the university and we have to get rid of AI before we all lose our jobs. And there's a lot of people in between, right? You have the pro AI view where it says teach students with AI, leverage this tool like other tools. We taught students Excel, we taught them to use Grammarly. We can show them how to use ChatGPT and they'll use that as a tool. You also hear the argument that industry is demanding this, so we have to start teaching students with that right away. We also have the anti-AI view where we say allowing AI brings in cheating and laziness and really undermines critical thinking. So nobody's actually doing their own work. You're just handing in pieces. So in other words, what are we actually doing here? Are we working on expanding our knowledge or finding new pathways to produce, some kind of output, or are we just copy pasting? And people are very upset about this. I've been to many meetings. I'm in a computer science field, so it's generally pretty boring. And people typically don't start screaming in these meetings, but in AI meetings, lots of people scream at me. And the interesting thing is that, unlike a lot of other things, I've been in meetings or conferences where people start talking about science fiction, like general AI, Terminators, and Skynet, when those are not real things. That's from a movie. It's not real life. What's really impacting us right now, like the critical emergency, is are people thinking about what they're doing, or are they just recycling AI and putting it out there? And I think there's a wide spectrum of what this looks like for students. Students are really pressured. There is a lot going on in the academy. How do they balance having these tools with getting things done? Is everybody just at 11:59 before the deadline, just like say, write me an essay, here you go. And you see this also happening among departments. So one of the chapters that I wrote was looking at different policies across the university at different levels. And you see that when you have STEM and business, they are more open to AI. They may be more open to AI because they're also developing AI. Those are the skills that they're teaching students: how to build models, how to train them, how to use them for different purposes, how to sort large amounts of data, how to be more efficient. Those are all things that, they're talking about, and this is just another tool to do that more efficiently. At the same time, you see humanities or English departments or heavy writing fields where they're more cautious and they're saying, you really need your original thought. Now, this is really interesting because I met a math professor that said that math students can't use ChatGPT to build the proofs they need for their thesis. Like, that's too complicated and takes too much processing, which AI can be very lazy and it doesn't actually do very well. So instead, the students come up with the proofs. They just drop the proofs in ChatGPT and say, write me the 2 pages to explain it, and that's their thesis. Now, they basically were advocating for AI to write the student's thesis, and in the same room, at the same meeting, there's an English professor, and this vein is throbbing in their head saying, you just told students to use ChatGPT to write their thesis. That would be unheard of, unthinkable in different disciplines. So I think it really comes down to what's your particular use case, what makes sense, what can AI do, what can't it do, and you end up having this huge amount of disagreement that happens in the same university among faculty from different perspectives looking at their work in different ways. So we hear these kinds of things like, embrace the technology, or you're a dinosaur. We can't risk letting us get behind. Industry demands AI, so we have to do it right away. So, for example, an administrator tells faculty they have to get on board with AI and left behind, but that's not very clear, like what that actually means. Faculty is like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. My knowledge is outdated. Other people are reckless with standards. There's no who's going. I've heard this over and over again. Who's going to train me? What training should I learn? How do I make it work? And at the same time, we're training technology that's complicated, that's fast changing, that every week there's a different kind of AI or AI technology coming out. And the problem is that top-down pressure can backfire because we have to understand what's the middle ground. Like, how do we work with this and at the same time make it work? From students, and I hear this all the time as well, about planning, about using AI in different ways to help students. So for students, AI is often another tool. Like, you have um, Google, Grammarly, Office, these different tools that students are using to do their work. And many integrate that into their study habits. There's been studies that show that nearly half of college students use generative AI in fall 2023 to help for homework, generate ideas, and so on. Students say that they save time, get unstuck on assignments. They use it for ideation, like give me a bunch of essay ideas that I could write about, and learn by example as reason for AI, like give me this in different contexts and put it together. And, unless you ask the students explicitly to disclose if they're using AI, they may not reveal that. They may not say that they're using AI. And, I think that we're in this bridging time. Like, I wrote my thesis in a time when AI didn't exist. So the way that my experience worked of having to, wake up and sit in front of the computer and think of new ideas and keep on writing until I was done is really changed in a world where there is AI. And if you talk to students now who are bridging that divide, like, for example, they started their bachelor's in the pre-AI world and now they're doing their master's when there is AI, it's very interesting to see how that shift happens. From the faculty perspective, there's only 22% of faculty, according to the study, that's using AI tools, and they're lagging behind students. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but there's slower adoption, lack of familiarity, which tool to pick and why and how. There's like a whole plethora of AI tools, and all of them are very complicated and sometimes contradictory. And how many $20 a month subscriptions could you afford when you're trying to actually accomplish X? Like, how many are you supposed to leverage together? And I've seen companies that have 20 or 30 AIs, but they're not all actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I think it really depends. Faculty who use AI seem it's inevitable and they want to guide students. And 75% of AI using profs say students need to use AI and understand these skills for their careers. Many faculty are looking for guidance and best practices, and they often call for workshops, institutional direction, and better ideas of how to implement AI in a way that works. So here's an example from a classroom. In the scenario, the instructor uses ChatGPT to generate code or examples and then critique it with students. So covered in more than one session, increased student engagement. They're looking at the quality of the AI output. And in this case, I built this paragraph from the Crow in the style of the Crow about my work, but I asked it to leave it not perfect, right? So we have something to talk about in class. Of course, if it came out exactly like, the Raven, then maybe it wouldn't be as interesting to talk about in class, which is possible to do too. So this is what I got. I said, once at night, I sat computing, weak and tired, maybe brooding, hoping someone knew the answer to the data on the floor. Suddenly, a tapping like a keyboard quickly clapping, and a bird came awkward flapping through the half-closed door. Yo, it said, not quite engaging, a voice a bit enraging, only this and then ignored. Confused, I asked for meaning, though my questions kept on leaning into frameworks, graphs, and tables, which the bird all but snored. Nevermore, it tried repeating, but the word came out competing with a buzz of coffee heating, a sound like evermore. I think you get an idea of what I do every day in class. Thus, the insight I was seeking turned to noise that I can't restore, and that's the end. Please, no encore. So this is not perfect. It could be improved. There are some pieces that could be better. This is a good example of creating a almost perfect thing to talk about in class. Shallow learning is a really critical element in this because if you're just copy pasting, then you end up doing shallow work that's not more superficial, not critically engaging, and then there's less reasoning that goes into it. So I think for all these, you have to look at AI as not a brain replacement, but an augmentation, something that you could use to help you do what you're already doing, especially if you understand that pathway. And this is really important to foster critical engagement. So if you ask students to cite or use AI and just explain why they used it, we can compare and contrast. I've seen this a lot in classes where a faculty member asks students to generate one version using AI, one version to write themselves, and write an analysis of how they're different. You could also emphasize process of looking at students to submit ideas or notes they develop alongside AI, with AI, look at the differences and understand how they got to where they're getting. What ideas can they contribute that would expand the context of the world of the answer the AI is giving? Quite often, the answers that we come up with in our work are coming from a completely unrelated place, and we tie them back in together with our subject. And AI is not very good at doing that because it's very focused on a small context. Imagine you ask somebody a question, but the only source of data they could get would be 50 pages or 100 pages or 200 pages, depending on the AI model you're using. The context window is pretty small comparatively, which means that the answer that you're getting is constrained inside of that small context. So by adding in new ideas, by looking at ideation in a way that you bring in ideas from your personal life experience and then build that into what you're trying to accomplish, you can come up with some very interesting new ideas that aren't necessarily recycled ideas before. And really, it comes down to critical thinking around AI literacy, understanding limits, biases, and how to fact check answers. Now, there's a huge environmental footprint with AI as well. I asked students one semester to write, if you use AI, that's totally fine. All you got to do is at the bottom of your paper, write using some calculation I gave out, how much did this actually cost in terms of power, in terms of lights, and so on. Training AI models takes an enormous amount of power. Using AI models takes an enormous amount of power. So the question is, how do you get students to critically think about what they're doing and how expensive it is? Again, students will tell me it's free from the university or it costs $20 a month and it's not a big deal. But maybe that's not the actual cost of what it really costs. Maybe that's the cost of the company that's selling it to you is losing money in order to get you using it in every aspect of what you're doing. And that's not necessarily a good thing. So what's the real environmental cost? And like I said before, we're moving towards a world with small AI that's going to be, more environmentally friendly, cheaper and easier to run, but we're not there yet. So as of today, like when you really put this in terms of at the bottom of your paper, you write this essay cost me 700 bottles of water equivalent to write this essay. Students think about that critically and they say like, maybe that doesn't make any sense. And I think once you see it in those terms, it really changes how we're engaging with AI from an environmental perspective. Now, in 2023, only 14% of colleges had any institutional AI guidelines. By 2024, still a problem, again, because there's so much disagreement between departments, between faculty, and so on. Most institutions left AI decisions to individual instructors, and there's many different approaches that happen as a result. So this happens because there's rapid technological change, uncertainty, and divided opinions make it hard to set one overarching policy, a policy that doesn't necessarily contradict what already exists. So for example, every department says you can't plagiarize. Now, whether you're using AI to do that or not doesn't necessarily change should you plagiarize. You can't make deepfakes and so on, right? Harassment and all these things come from, yes, you could do those differently using AI, but that's not necessarily about AI. That's what the underlying policy is. So, there are more policies that are happening as we start building this out by consultation and looking at it. Now, the first question I want to ask is, are we police? Like, is that the job? Are you trying to detect AI and stop people from using it? Some people are, and this approach can be really challenging because it can be difficult to definitively prove. I've used AI detectors and I've used many of my samples of my own writing that I wrote and I put into AI detectors and it said that I'm AI. I'm also trained a certain way and I've been writing for a long time in a certain pattern. So, maybe I write robotically or I use certain word choices that are constrained to a certain world of choices just because of the way that I've been trained and how my supervisor told me to write and so on. I still don't know what passive voice is, but AI can explain it to me. So the question is, how much of your time do you want to spend policing AI use or finding creative ways to work with it? So that's really a key question because many of these policies are around policing. So you accuse a student, how do you actually prove it? Or how do you work with students to critically think about it and engage? I think the big challenge is that you can't pretend that AI doesn't exist. That's the number one most important thing because it does exist. People use it all the time. They use it for everyday everything. And, I think you really have to get people on board to use consensus building. So, try to get agreement on at least some pieces of this through the institution, whether it's at the class and so on. Technology changes very quickly. So you want to make sure that as new things come out, you follow what's happening. And the policy could become outdated because new AI, for example, multimodal agents and so on, are rapidly changing how AI works and what it does. The question is, how do we enforce AI rules? If AI detectors are unreliable, and they usually are, then we need to figure out how to do this. Is it an honor system? Is it something else? To definitively prove AI cheating, you need large samples of text. And if a student is handing in 3 sentences, it's difficult to do that. There was talk, or there is talk about AI fingerprinting, so that based on the patterns of words that come out, it knows that it was AI generated. And that's not 100%, and it's only some engines, and it only works some of the time. So using that technology for everybody in your class could be highly problematic. There's an issue of scope. What should the policy cover? Is it just assignments? Is it using AI for research, for ideation, for administrative tasks, or other things? In my department, we had a conversation about should faculty be able to use AI, or should faculty disclose their use of AI if they build a quiz using AI? Now, I'll tell you, I once did build a quiz a couple of years ago. I used ChatGPT to do it. I fed it in, and all the students wrote me complaint letters. It's like this complete catastrophic failure of like 100 emails. And I said, okay, something obviously went wrong. I look at the emails and all the questions did have a right answer, but every question also had 2 right answers. So there was a 50-50 chance that if you knew the right answer, the other right answer you didn't select and you got the question wrong. A lot of complaints about that. So not good. Like you really have to be careful about what comes out and have a human in the loop in these AI systems that you're checking what comes out. And there's also this issue around intellectual property. Putting everything else aside, where does the data in the AI model come from? How is it trained? Whose data is it trained on? And is this really what you want to be recycling into your essay, product, etc.? It might not be, right? And there's this question about if the student creates it solely using AI and they're not involved at all, then what happens? You could make an AI bot, like an agent, give it the syllabus, say, just complete everything in the course and let me know what happens. There's even packages online where the bot will log into Zoom and, do attendance and then hand in the assignment, read the transcript, and then just build all the homework at the end of the class with the student not even being there. So I think that, like as you look at these examples, you really have to think, how do we critically adjust or, build policies for AI? So I came up with some ideas that we have multi-level system of governance. And in the paper, I recommended a 3-tier policy. So we have institutional-wide policies, which are broad principles, academic integrity, and resource support. And those are things that apply mostly already in most institution-wide policies, maybe tweaked a little bit to, look at the world of AI. Department and faculty level, there's specific context rules that align with institutional policies and are tailored for that specific discipline of how people use AI. Obviously, the computer science department is going to have very different rules than the English department when it comes to how and where to use AI. And then at the instructor level, preserving academic freedom, allowing instructors to, within the context of the institution and the department, to set the kind of AI policies that they want to use for their class. So this means that the policy is flexible. It has core values that are shared among the whole organization, but the implementation can change. I think it's important to discuss this in class because one student who takes 5 classes might have 5 different policies depending on what they're taking. For an institutional level policy, we want to look at AI should be used in service and learning with honesty and transparency, address campus-wide issues like academic integrity, how do you define it, equity commitments, and data privacy standards and tools. We want to provide support training programs and use AI as a tool repository and look at what those tools are. Many universities now have a page on all the AI tools that are available to students, how to use them, in what context to use them. And by explaining that, you don't leave people on their own, you actually provide some form of training. For example, you could ban AI tools that violate policy. I've seen many policies that look at this specific issue. Again, violating privacy generally would not be acceptable, making deepfakes using AI even more so. So you're not necessarily changing the institutional underlying policy, you're just reinforcing it with new use cases that have arisen because of AI. You're also looking at disclosure of AI via coursework or other elements. You also want to make sure that there's access, so you provide licenses and hardware to students and faculty so they can use it. Now, this happens often through the ecosystem. So if you're a school that uses Google or OpenAI or Microsoft, you tend to get Copilot or Gemini or OpenAI, ChatGPT, through those existing agreements that you have. There's not very many universities or institutions that have OpenAI, ChatGPT, although they're trying to expand that to more. Most schools already use Microsoft, they already use Google, so they're like, here's some free AI that came with our subscription. So that's very common. And there are ways to show students how to use Copilot to come up with ideas and so on. At the department level, this is needed because different departments have different priorities. And they might look at originality versus correctness in different ways. Like I told you, like, the math department, they really care about the proofs that you have to build an AI can't build for you. But they don't really care about the writing. That's not what, their strength is. And one of the professors told me that if the writing is better than the student could produce otherwise because they're a math student, then, that's okay with us because we want the thesis to be readable and communicate their findings. And, when you look at the department on a department level, how it fits into pedagogy, the history department might have a very different view of this in the computer science department. Departments should have short guidelines for instructors and students so everybody understands the rules clearly, how to use it in the context. They can have consistency across courses and faculty reference so that you have some suggested language. And I put together a companion site that we'll send you the link for. And in that companion site, there's many examples of different kinds of language policy that you can adapt for your particular use case. There's the opportunity to innovate AI pilots. You really need a champion to take this off. If, people talk about AI, but they're like, I don't have the time or capacity to do this. My institution's not giving me the time or training to actually implement it. One person, leading the way and showing by example can really help build those examples into the department. And at the same time, it's really important to maintain academic freedom of faculty to make sure that they're delivering the courses in the way that they see is appropriate and that works for the context of their class, what you're trying to accomplish. Now, the obvious question, and I'll ask you because this is what everybody says, did you read the syllabus? Having those policies in your syllabus is really critical. And faculty needs to communicate the conditions for AI use, can use it for brainstorming, grammar help, coding, or something else. Citation disclosure requirements, definition of misuse. Now, from a faculty perspective, especially if you're doing research, the policies around this have shifted numerous times. So you've had, you could use AI to write a paper, but you can't use AI to review a paper. I recently talked to an organization that said AI is good for everything, right? I recently talked to a journal that said AI is good for nothing. So because in our professional lives, we have this divided and fractured workspace of how AI is being used, it can be really complicated how to bring that back to your class and say, okay, this is what's going to serve the students best in order to do it. Now, I think it's important to explain the rationale, admit that AI is a real thing, and not ignore it. That's really critical. And you can change the policy as you go. And again, the tools that I put into the companion site can help you do that by providing many different examples of policy. This is an example of an AI policy that I currently have this semester in my class. And I said generative AI tools can be a useful resource, but they can also create complications if used improperly. In this course, you could use AI generated code for your assignments, but your grade reflects the quality of your final submission. If you rely solely on AI content without understanding the underlying concepts, you'll miss out on developing the critical thinking skills this course aims to teach. Using generative AI on autopilot mode can result in code that lacks creativity or contain errors, negatively impacting your grade. It's recommended that you focus on building a strong foundation in programming and data transformation. That's what this particular course is about. If you choose to use AI code, then you have to indicate this in your assignment and add a comment explaining how and why you used it, which is only like one sentence. This ensures transparency and shows that you understand the work that you submitted. And in this context, so I'm a business professor teaching data science courses in a business school. I often have students that make amazing code, but they don't necessarily have any business sense. So like they can create a whole platform and it all works, but the idea underlying it doesn't make sense, or it costs too much money to run, or it's not feasible at all. Those things have to go together in the context of these students. So just by auto-generating with AI, you could produce a lot at scale, but it might be a lot of garbage at scale, not really a high quality idea that you're building everything else around. Now, there's a lot of talk around AI resilient assignments. This idea of, when we're going to make AI proof assignments and nobody's ever going to be able to use AI. I don't know. I've tried many different versions. We'll talk about some of them. I've looked at requiring multiple drafts. So AI could be part of that or not as students go from one iteration to the next. I've incorporated oral components. So I had annotated PowerPoints. I've had classroom presentations. And the real challenge is that if you have a large class and each person is handing in a 10-minute or 20-minute or 30-minute annotated presentation, it takes a long time to listen to it and then mark it. So at scale, that doesn't work very well, especially if you have a gigantic class. There are technologies that can help with this. There are tools that can help with this, but it really comes down to how are we scaling and at the same time providing high quality education. I often put personalized or local context into the prompts that students are using. So they're writing an AI about their own life. One of my students, I said, explain what happened in this class and what you took away from it. And the student wrote a film noir, explanation of my life. They said the professor walked into the classroom with, the light glinting off of his eyes and in his fedora. Like, I'm like, you wrote a 1930s kind of, film noir Paris type of story about this class. That's not what we did. Like, we did something else in this class. I don't know. Like that is, you could build prompts. You could put in. One of my colleagues put in hidden text inside of the assignment prompt. So when the student just copy and pasted the whole page into ChatGPT, it started writing about clowns and stuff like that, which obviously was not part of the assignment. We could emphasize applied projects, so students work together in groups to solve problems, or they work, in class to do things. This becomes challenging when you're layering these type of technologies with high flex classes with students that you may not see in real life. So, there's a lot of different pieces that you could think about on how to integrate AI and at the same time provide academic integrity, make sure that students are learning, accomplish the right pieces. And we have this challenge of how exactly are you supposed to do that, verifying that AI content is not automatically being used by the student. This is particularly important because some AI content is really, really good. And that brings us back to the question of equity. Is the student with a $2,000 a month AI going to be that much better than the student with a $20 a month AI? Like, is the model going to support better grades? And what does that mean for providing access to faculty and students to which model? Should we all have the same model? Should we use different ones? This is a great conversation to have with students to make sure that we're on the same page. I think it's important to trust but verify, create a culture where people expect honesty. You could have an honor code policy. You'll see some examples on the site. Teach students how to use AI ethically and understand some of the challenges like we've talked about today, environmental impacts and other impacts. Maybe AI isn't necessarily cheating, but we want to talk about it transparently and with guidelines. Talk about AI detectors. I have language in the policy around how AI detectors can and can't be used. They can often be unreliable, so making that the only source of accusing students could be highly problematic. And that could be a really big challenge. And looking at an AI usage statement, a policy in your syllabus, department, meeting, university also really helps as well. I think that supporting faculty is a really critical part. On the right-hand side, you'll notice that I used Copilot and I said, give me 3 ideas for a class on public speaking. And it started going and building these ideas. Great way for ideation and using that to figure things out. But faculty are worried about this. And I think that having small conversations, starting with like, how do I update my syllabus with AI for a small policy statement? How do I encourage a community of practice that we could all talk about this? And everybody's worried about this in every department. And if we can get together in the same room and talk about how we can build a community that thinks about these ideas collectively will really help building policy that benefits students. And students will start to see like similarities in course outlines, in syllabi as they start working across the campus. So I think it's important to pilot small, safe experiments and maybe look at how it works. I'm not saying everybody has to use AI, but I'm saying that everybody can't ignore that AI is a real thing. I think it's really important to have inclusive policy development because not everybody's on the same page with this. And getting people from different ranks and fields, students, staff, IT librarians, disability services, and putting them in the same room and saying, how are we going to implement this policy? What does it look like? I've heard fascinating things from students that I would have never thought of had I only been speaking to faculty members. So I think that by combining the resources that you have in the institution, it really helps bring people together and making them feel like they belong and that their contributions are important. And I recommend starting an AI policy task force, or at least talking about it, to start gathering some information. Do a survey, start saying, what are people saying about it and how does it work? Now, as you implement this, it's really important to have monitoring and evaluation. So you're tracking, what does this look like? How often are we seeing academic violations? I recently heard of the first example where somebody wore AI glasses into an exam. That never happened before. So new policies have to be written around what kind of glasses you could wear going into an exam. And that goes into everything that we're doing, especially when we're writing essays or PowerPoints or ideas and so on. And we really have to have a cycle that refines policy so that as things change and technology evolves, which it seems to do all the time now, we get back and we look at it in a way that makes sense, right? We also want to see like what's happening with explainable AI, a new technology that exists. It's expensive. It exists in some contexts, but maybe that's a way that we could leverage these different pieces together. We want to make sure that we have equity and access, and that faculty as well as students have access to tools, and that's really important. And a good policy should have these pieces like acceptable use, disclosure, integrity, privacy, faculty guidance, and have a review cycle. These pieces are all important to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that the information that people are putting in is done responsibly, that's not being recycled into the AI model that other people have access to, and that, we understand how people are using AI so that there's less uncertainty about it. And I think to make it actually work, we have to have communication and talk to students about this and acknowledge that it's a real thing and we're thinking about how to deal with it. We want to align policy with teaching practice so that faculty don't feel that they're getting technology forced on them or vice versa. That we have support from leaders in a way that looks at ethical AI use, that it's not a catastrophe that we're trying to respond to, but instead we're trying to build capacity. And for most organizations, this is a huge cultural shift in the way that we've done things. But the technology is changing many fields. We have to look at how do we accommodate it. Now, looking ahead, we have many new technologies like AI agents, multimodal AI that does videos, that does images, AI assistants, and we start seeing AI baked into everything. So many students have told me, like, I'm not using ChatGPT, but I use Grammarly. Is that okay? That's also AI. But now Google, Office Suite or Microsoft is going to have AI baked in as well. So at what point does the AI stop and the tools that we've used before start? And that's why it's really important to think about policies that are responsive to those market changes, because the tools that we use every day will start having more and more AI in them. Whether or not that's a good thing, that's a debate for a different day, but that's definitely the direction that it's going in. So the question is, like, how does AI regulation, if that exists, it currently doesn't really outside of Europe, and it might start happening in more places. We do know that you're not supposed to use AI according to rules in Canada for critical decisions like hiring and firing, financial decisions, and so on. But machine learning is used in all those fields already for that purpose. So I think that having an explainable AI, that's really important. How does AI look in terms of scholarly research, publishing, and all the work that we're doing, creating classes, content, and so on. AI policy really is an ongoing thing where departments are changing, where we have ongoing discussion of how this looks across the institution, and all AI policies for departments may not be the same. And I think that's really important as well. But despite all of that, despite everything that I've said, AI can be good for education if we navigate it thoughtfully. And it's important to re-examine how we're teaching, what we value, and how to train students in a way that will help build capacity. So thank you very much.
Wow, excellent. Thank you so much for that, Sydney. I have a few questions here that are on cue. If you're
Ready?
all right, sounds good. Okay, we'll start with Judy would like to know, do you know of any AI evaluation tool frameworks to use with students to help them gain AI critical thinking skills to look at issues or bias, accuracy, etc.?
So thank you, Judy. That's a great question. I have some tools in the companion site that I built. You can grab it from the QR code where it says resources. And yeah, there are many different tools out there to help students think about it. I recommend if I could just go back for a second to here and having these elements as part of your discussion. Because in terms of acceptable use, how to use it in the classroom, do students have to disclose or not? What does academic integrity mean in this context? Privacy around the data that you're using and so on, as well as faculty guidance and having a review cycle in the class to talk about it, even between semesters, is a really important factor in order to make sure that you're able to, make those pieces work. So I think if you look at the companion site, there's many, many case examples of how this comes together and some sample language that you could use.
All right, great. Thank you for that. Next question is from Judith. When we talk about environmental resources used for Gen AI, students have asked if other internet resources and sources don't use as much resources like water. Is there an answer that we can share with our students?
Yes. So internet resources, let's say like Google search, do use electricity, power, and a database where they have to go through and find the answer. Imagine I said to you, I have a question for you, and I want you to go into your office and find the answer in a book in your office. It would take you some time, but you could find the answer pretty quickly. If I said the same thing, but you have to go to the largest library in the world, you'd be doing a lot more searching. That's basically what we're talking about. Generative AI can find answers, but it might take 1,000 times more energy to find the same answer because you're looking at a much bigger building. It's also not using the same technology. Generative AI is like fridge magnets. I'm sure you've seen those fridge magnets that are like you can put them together to make a sentence. Generative AI is like trillions of those fridge magnets in a big bag. And then there's a certain underlying pattern or pathway that you have to choose in order to get to the right answer. So obviously, like scrambling those using a technology called transformers can be really difficult to find the right answer. It requires a lot of effort because you have so many pieces and so many different ways that they can be reshuffled. So the answer is that generative AI is not very efficient. It does a lot more work. That's really what it comes down to.
Great, thanks for that, Sydney. I just want to remind participants, if you do have a question, please do put it in the Q&A because I know there's a lot of side conversation going on in the chat, so I may have missed anything that's going on there. A question from Amanda. Do you think the AI bubble is bound to pop anytime soon?
Amanda, that's an excellent question. And we're at peak hype right now. So, I think that right now companies are saying AI everything. My underlying question is, how much does this actually cost? And are people making money from it? There was a recent study that said between 60 and 80% of AI projects in businesses are being abandoned because companies got into it saying, this is an amazing idea, but then realized there was no business value. So they just stopped doing it. And I think that this is a really big challenge because, right now people are getting into the hype, but it's not actually translating into action. And that's really a huge problem when you look at what is the value. So is it important? I go and I look at code on the student screen and right away I see what the answer is because I've been doing this for a very long time. I know the underlying pathway of what it should look like. And, students used to write me a few years ago and say, can you explain to me what happened in a lecture or explain the textbook? And I would say, read the book, watch the video, that's what we did in class. But now students are saying, can you explain ChatGPT to me? My obvious question is, why aren't you asking ChatGPT to explain it to you? And that's the challenge. Like, if we're not talking about how to use these skills the right way, then they're not going to be leveraged for the right purposes, which should be teaching the student how to do things if you only know how to ask the question and what order to do it in. Thank you. Excellent question.
Great, thanks for that, Sydney. Renata says the issue lies on changing the mindset to actually learn how to use AI in each field in education. How do you get instructors to actually think about ways they could shift the way they are teaching, including AI, in a way to foster critical thinking?
Thank you, Renata. That's a very good question. And I think it's important for everybody to start where they are. I think that AI topic can be really big and there's a lot of very complicated pieces that go into it, so much so that it gets lost in the noise. I think it's important to make small wins. Put one paragraph in your syllabus and the first class actually talk about what it means, how students are using it, ask them for their opinions, and start bringing that into the practice. I think that it all affects us in different ways, depending on what you're doing. One of my colleagues in fine arts said that as students are painting paintings, like on commission, the client comes in and says, you know what, I don't like the face, tweak it a little bit, regenerate it. But you can't regenerate a painting like you could regenerate AI. You actually have to make a whole new painting. Like, that's not how painting works. So, we have to look at, in our specific practice, how it impacts us. What are small wins that we can make to start getting up to date, to implementing in the classroom, to have a discussion around how students are using it. And every context is going to be very different, but ultimately, I think will be very beneficial depending on how people end up using it. Thank you for the question.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. Corinne asks, are there any risks of losing communication and writing skills with AI? Is there any data that can prove this?
So, Karine, it's very new and there's studies coming out every day on AI. I'm not sure if there's one on losing writing communication skills, but that's a good paper if you can put it together. I work on many AI related papers, so if you want to do that research, I'm happy to. But I really think that this is a huge problem. And I don't teach English, I teach coding, but it's the same thing. If you don't understand how the underlying system works, then inevitably what starts happening is that students can't build their end product. I am doing a case study now on someone who vibe coded. They just invented building an app, their way to a very large, very fancy venture capital investment in their company. And when I told this to students, the students were like, that's amazing. Like, the person just sat on ChatGPT and $1 million company came out of it. I said to the guy, what's the first thing you're going to spend the money on? Like, what are you investing in? And he's like, obviously, hire programmers. And I said, why would you hire programmers? You built the whole company using ChatGPT. What do you need programmers for? And he said, oh, the critical part is I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just copy pasting and I still don't know how to code. So I really need people who could do what I did in 6 months in 1 day because they do know what they're doing. Having domain knowledge is critical. So I always tell students, when I go to a company and the company says, invent KPIs for me, I'm like, how am I supposed to do that? I don't know what your business does or how it works or what the internal dynamics are. And this is the exact same thing. So we really have to understand, what are those fundamental skills that you need to have, and will students using AI really learn the difference between your, and your? I don't know, right? I don't know if they're going to pick up on that really critical piece, because there's a learning pathway to establish that by having a conversation like this, right? And if you don't know that, then you're just, maybe that's not an important skill, or maybe it's really critical. Like I said earlier, I still have no idea what passive voice is, and they keep on asking AI to explain to me, and I still don't understand. Granted, when I was writing my thesis, I also did that in the library, and I asked a teaching assistant to teach me also. They also had no idea what that was. But, the point is that, like, it's really difficult to learn new things unless it's in a way that you can understand. So I think meeting people where they are and building that context so that they can leverage AI more effectively is really critical.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that, Dr. Shapiro. We are at time. So I just wanted to thank you for such an insightful and thought-provoking presentation. You've given us a lot to reflect on, new opportunities and important challenges as we consider the future of AI in higher education. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it was our pleasure. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Your questions and comments really added to the conversation, and we appreciate the time you took here to be here and to engage so actively. Just a quick reminder that the recording and the slides from today's session will be available on teachonline.ca, and you'll also receive the link through the Zoom system in about 24 hours. If you do have any other questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out. Dr. Shapiro has his contact information on this slide there, and we'd love to hear from you. I hope you'll join us again on October 9th for our next Contact North webinar called Beyond Crystal Balls, an interactive webinar on designing education's plural futures. And that will be presented by Dr. George Veletsianos from the University of Minnesota. So thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.